Hi, and welcome to this short video on key structural decisions for core management concepts. So we're going to look in particular at a few of those questions, not all of them. Before we do, I just want to remind you that an organisational structure can be seen as management's attempt to draw a map of who they want to do what. So it's focused on creating the kind of organisation that managers think they need to have in order to get the tasks achieved. So the correct chains of command, the correct level of bureaucracy, and so forth. So these kinds of questions, these 6 questions, will help companies to decide what it is that they want to do and how they're going to do it using structure. And the questions that we look at, the elements of structure that we consider in this unit are: where should the organisation's boundaries be? So in other words, what are they going to do versus what is someone else going to do? And then how should work be divided and combined? What are the lines of authority and communication? How much bureaucracy do we need? And what should be the extent of centralisation? So in the first element of this mini lecture, we're going to look specifically at where should the organisation's boundaries be, because this is the more challenging of these 5 questions, and we have some specific terminology that we want to think about here, which is helpful for me to explain to you. And then we'll be looking at Mintzberg's structure in 5s, where we will consider all of these questions because they are all components of structure in 5s. So then this first initial question, where should an organisation's boundaries be? Well, we can think about it in relation to a pie manufacturer. And what we're saying is, what should a pie manufacturer make? So should they just have this small business where they just make pies, or should they think about expanding in some way? And this is where the complex terminology comes in. So their current position is making pies. If they want to go forward into the customer marketplace, this is called vertical integration. And that's where you integrate another business or another element of the product or service delivery into the work that you're doing. So for a pie manufacturer, if they were going to vertically integrate forward, then they would be going into the customer marketplace, perhaps creating a pie shop to sell directly to the customer, rather than just selling their pies onto another retailer. If they vertically integrated backward, it would mean that they went into their existing supply chain. So in other words, where they use maybe beef and flour and eggs and butter, whatever it might be that they use to create the pastry or the fillings for their pie, what happens if they then vertically integrate backward into the supply chain? So they don't buy those things off someone else anymore, they produce them themselves. So in this case, I've suggested that maybe that pie manufacturer might want to manufacture some wheat as well. So grow some wheat and then put that through the process to turn it into flour to make the pie. If the pie company wants to expand, but it doesn't want to vertically integrate either forward or backward, it could think about horizontal integration. And that is where it creates a complementary good or service. So in the case of a pie manufacturer, a good complementary good or service might be gravy. Might use some of the offshoots of the stuff that they've made. They might boil up the bones to make the gravy. And also it can be served alongside the pie. So it seems like a sensible horizontal integration to undertake. Horizontal diversification or integration has a number of advantages. So firstly, related diversification. We just need to think quickly. All of the things that we've thought about here are related. They're all related to the pie industry and to pie manufacturer and to pie sales and pie creation. You could also, if you're a pie manufacturer, decide to make peppermints or coffee cups or build houses. You could do anything you wanted, and that would be unrelated diversification. So related diversification is doing something that is in some way in the same space that you're already in. Unrelated diversification is going into other industries or markets. So horizontal diversification, when it's related, so when it's a pie manufacturer making gravy, for example, can bring economies of scale and scope. So you can share skills and you can share inputs and you can share logistics of getting those out to consumers. You can also share skills and competencies between the creation of the different products and services. You may also be able to leverage your brand name. So if you are a famous pie manufacturer, then making gravy might be a really good thing. You can have it next to your pies in the supermarket and people will already trust that you can make good gravy because it's a component of your pie. You can also use shared marketing skills and knowledge, because it will be targeting a similar market in a similar way, and also use existing sales and distribution capacity. If it's unrelated diversification, so let's say a pie manufacturer making coffee cups, it will grow the business, and it will also reduce risk by operating in various markets or product lines, so you're not just exposed to the vagaries of one market. It can also help as a way to refocus the company if you think you are currently operating in the wrong space. So if, for example, you're spotting that in your country people are eating healthier and reducing the amount of pies that they're eating, then moving into coffee, where coffee, if it has no milk in it, has 0 calories, may be a really good thing to focus on if you are in a health conscious country. It can also help you to defend against the takeover, because someone may be less likely to want to acquire you if you do a lot of very odd things, because say another pie manufacturer, they might want to buy your pie element of your business, but my goodness, they don't want to be saddled with a coffee cup manufacturer. And it also allows you to explore projects of interest to the owners or executives without them leaving. So it can help to maintain interest and to use their passion and expertise. So one of the companies that I'm an associate for at the moment, they are looking at expanding their service line because their owners are looking for a new challenge and are ready to do something different. So they're looking at a tech development alongside some of the other work that they do, which is not related. Horizontal diversification has disadvantages. So if you do unrelated diversification, so that's pie plus coffee cup, you may be seen as making portfolio choices for investors they didn't want to make. So remember back to financial management and thinking about a balanced portfolio. We'll also be covering it later in more detail. Excuse me. Then your investors may want to make those decisions themselves. It may also stretch your resources too thinly at the expense of a successful business line. And economies of scope and scale, unfortunately, often don't deliver what they promised. So they don't provide the cost savings that everyone thinks they will. It can also dilute the original brand name and can reduce brand equity if the new product or service fails. So in terms of diluting the original brand name, if you've got a company who make pies called Perfect Pies, and then you create Perfect Coffee Cups, it starts to make it all a bit messy and confusing. Vertical integration then, so that's going forwards or backwards, forwards into the marketplace or backwards into the supply chain. It's an advantage because it creates a ready established buyer in the new market. So whether it's you buying pies from yourself to sell in your shops, or whether it's you buying flour to put in your pies, you've got a ready established buyer. You've got 2 links in the supply chain. It can also reduce the cost of production and sales by cutting out a layer in the value chain. So there's a layer when someone isn't trying to extract a profit. There's no cost attached to someone else's profits. You've reduced it where you're only looking for a profit once. It can also, unfortunately though, as a disadvantage, be seen as making portfolio choices for investors they don't want to make. It can stretch your resources too thinly, and again, it can dilute your brand name. So now let's think about structure in 5. So this is Mintzberg's theory that when he looked at organisations, he found 5 common patterns in terms of how they were structured. And he sees that there are 5 basic building blocks of an organisation: the strategic apex, middle line and operating core, and then the technostructure and the support staff. And he believes these are combined in different ways or excluded in some cases to make 5 typical organisational structures that we see in the working world around us. Let's just think about this structure in 5's diagram for a moment. The strategic apex are the senior managers and leaders at the top of the organisation. So the people on the board of directors, if you're in a publicly listed company, who are making the big strategic decisions. The middle line are the middle management and the people who are operating between the strategic apex and the operating core. And then the operating core are the people who do the frontline work or who directly manage those people. So if, for example, you're running a chain of supermarkets, they are the people who are stacking the shelves, running the tills, and the direct managers that make sure that they do their job and that things keep going. The technostructure are the people who do technical roles or technological roles that keep the company running. So it might be your IT services and so forth. Your support staff are the people who support in other ways the the functions that are going on. So whether it's HR, marketing, and so forth. So he says that you can combine these different elements into 5 different generic structure models. So as you can see with a simple structure, there are no lumps on the sides. So you haven't got techno structure and you haven't got support staff. With a machine bureaucracy, they return. With a divisional form, you've got a big support staff, small techno structure at the whole organisation level, but then your separate sub businesses below look very like a machine bureaucracy, and so forth. So we're going to look at each of these in turn. So you use a simple structure when you're a little firm with just a few workers, where the firm isn't big enough to have lots of technology or support staff and the owner directly supervises more junior workers. And I want you to think about the advantages and disadvantages of each of these. I'm not going to go through those, not in detail, but let's think briefly about them for the simple structure. So the advantages of this is you've got a clear line of command and control. The disadvantage is that as you grow, there aren't enough support workers or technologically oriented staff to enable to have the structure in place to do that growing in a sensible way. And often you find that as a company gets bigger, they often hang on to the simple structure for too long, and it's a bit chaotic for a year or so before they move into having a wider number of staff. An example of a simple structure might be my local yoga studio, yoga home. It's still very small, only has a handful of staff, and they run yoga classes, and that's it. It's that straightforward. Machine bureaucracy happens when you have a producer of standardized goods or services. So you've got bigger and you're doing things in a standardized way, and they need to follow standardized processes to produce the standardized goods or services, whether that's Nike trainers, Starbucks coffee, tin tomatoes, cars, window panes. It could also be services, so it could be holidays, it could be contracts for providing IT support and repair. So anything very standardized, producing standardized goods or services with lots of support staff and technology to ensure that standardization. So UPS, paperclip manufacturer, steelworks, a travel agency, all of these sorts of things would probably be a machine bureaucracy, a large travel agency, that is. And car manufacturing is the classic example. So although it used to look like that, now it looks like this, there is still the same elements in place. You've still got the strategic apex, the middle line, and your operating core. Your operating core might just have got a little smaller, and you absolutely need your support staff and your techno structure to keep it running. Thirdly, we've got divisional forms. This is a diversified multi-product firm where headquarters controlled by standardizing output. So for example, specifying what needs to happen, when, how many something should be produced, what the quality of goods and services should be, and so forth. These divisional forms will continue to need admin support to ensure the coordination and control of the separate business units below. So something like Nestle, where they've got lots of separate products that they're making in different or semi-autonomous business units, would be having a divisional form. Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's company, and the Virgin Group, these are all examples of divisional forms. They operate slightly differently to one another, or even significantly differently in the case if you compared Nestle and Berkshire Hathaway, where Berkshire Hathaway has hardly any staff in its head office, and Nestle has a very well-staffed head office, but nonetheless they're using what is largely speaking a divisional form. And so if you look at Virgin, for example, here you've got all sorts of different brands, some still in existence, some which have long bit the dust. And you've got at the top the Berkshire Hathaway's main brands. Again, some really big brands there. Then we have the professional bureaucracy, so that's knowledge intensive client work, so large operating core with lots of professionals who are needed to perform that knowledge intensive work, and therefore lots of support staff to support them. And you're looking often at finance companies and accountancy practices, law firms, architects practices, and so forth. So here's a list of big professional service firms. You can see some common names there that you will absolutely recognise. And then finally, the ad hocracy. So this would be a firm working on ever-changing, often creative projects, where they need a structure that can be flexible to fit new circumstances, and hence the dotted line. The people in the operating core will often be switched out, or they might be on contracts, they might be freelancers, because they want to be able to free up the other resources to do the work at hand. So the mid layer, they are seen as employed, and they do lots of different things. They do the tech stuff, they do the support stuff, and they do the middle management, and they also bring in people to work on the lower level, on the operating core, giving ultimate flexibility. So something like a creative studio for the film industry, using lots of freelancers to deliver their work, a tech startup, an organisation which is forever talking about pivoting. They've got that really flexible operating core. And the story of Odeo turning into Twitter, if you Google that, you will find a really good example of a company who very much pivoted. And you could maybe think about that in relation to this idea of the adhocracy and how they had the flexibility to be able to do that. So overall then, we can talk about the value of Mintzberg's work when he did structure in fives. The major advantages are that it shows common combinations of factors and identifies what the key challenges and opportunities of those structures might be. An important note for the exam is you need to be very clear on what the advantages and disadvantages are that each structural type might bring to a company. The disadvantages of his work are that it's overly simplistic, and as the workplace continues to change, does the adhocracy cover enough of the new forms we're seeing, or is it just a kind of catch-all that isn't really appropriate to the forms that we're now seeing today? Thank you. Hope you'll tune into a future one of these sessions. I hope you found it helpful.